All right. Um, I do actually have stuff to say while people are coming into this today. So I'm going to be spending the first little bit while people are showing up to talk about my favorite podcast, A More Civilized Age. This is a podcast about Star Wars: The Clone Wars, the 3D animated cartoon. It's not just another Star Wars podcast of them going through the plots of the episodes or whatever. They actually dig into the politics of what we do and don't see on screen. The hosts are most often analyzing this show as a work about the War on Terror era U.S. foreign policy, but they also love talking about how Anakin and Obi-Wan are like sexy himbos and stuff. So, it's fun. But I'm going to directly quote their blurb about the show that they have. Join Rob Zachney, Natalie Watson, Ali Akampora, and Austin Walker as they dive headfirst into the final days of the Galactic Republic, debate which Jedi is messiest, and dig into the themes and politics of the Clone Wars. And one more time, the name of the podcast is A More Civilized Age. This was free advertising for them, not paid. I support them on Patreon, so it's almost like reverse paid advertising. I not only pay them, but also advertise. And then I see people are in the chat now. Hey, it's Vic and 2 + 4 × 5 and Greg. Won't be able to chat for a little while, but we'll be listening. That's all right. Good to see you. And as a reminder to the audience, last week's audience participation question was, do you think Taylor should try to go back to school and finish out the year with how she's struggling and the amount of school that she's starting to skip? Or, what do you think she should do, basically? So we've got the start of a new arc. The tension levels have been reset, and today we'll get time as we sort of tease at the main premise at the end of the second chapter. Sort of stumbled over that. We'll get time and place as setting, and then we'll also tease at the main premise of the arc. But anyway, moving on to 3.1. We open the chapter with Taylor waking up at home the next morning after 2.9, so when she had stayed at the loft. The story started on a Friday, and we've only made it to Tuesday so far, so not a lot of actual days have passed. Today, the conversation with her dad, or lack thereof, is tracked into... it's like packed all into half a sentence as she tries to leave the house and hides her hair with her hooded sweatshirt. Given the earliness of her run, the city is still mostly empty. There were no cars or people in the streets. It's 6:30 a.m., and her breath still fogs in the air, despite it being well into April. Taylor starts running on a regimen in February after getting her powers in January. Building stamina is her major goal so she can run around all the time during cape fights. She decided to do this because of almost getting pranked by a group of guys from her high school who chased her down the block. She suspects they were trying to duct tape her to a telephone pole at the behest of Sophia. Vic says, Tay-Tay's life moving too fast. I would be so tired. Yeah, we'll talk about it in a bit, but she didn't get much sleep last night either. So, yeah, nice April Fool's reference. Thank you, Vic. We'll talk about it in a bit, but Taylor only got a few hours of sleep again. So it's like multiple nights in a row, only getting a few hours of sleep each day. And then, let's see here. Taylor alternates her route and doesn't keep track of times or distance when she runs. She just tries to stay in tune with her body and sort of push herself if it feels too easy. Taylor has a sort of unflattering description of herself from the past, and I had the unfortunate combination of a slight bulge for a belly, small breasts, and a broomstick-thin arms and legs. It had added up to me looking something like a frog forced to stand up on its hind legs. And then Vic had said, as a comment on this makes me sad because this is just child body. But I'm sure for Taylor it's not what she wants. But she says 3.5 months had burned away the body fat, leaving me very lean, and had given me the stamina to run at a steady jog without leaving me panting for breath. She has increasing confidence about her body with progress from her workout routine, and seems to have still have a healthy relationship to food. Vic says, Taylor be like, when I was a baby, I had a bulbous head, tiny little arms and legs. Yeah. Taylor gets to the boardwalk right around 7 o'clock and meets Brian. The area was mostly still closed, with steel shutters and iron gates in place until the shops open. But food places were open and some shops were receiving shipments. Brian's leaning on the railing, looking out at the ocean, and he's already got coffee and donuts. Brian smiles at Taylor, and she thinks about the clothes he's wearing. He's able to blend the high-end area with slightly different clothing choices and really blend in there, and it impresses Taylor, and she also feels unfashionable. Because, yes. Vic goes on to say that Taylor would complain about having tiny teeth, or not having any teeth. I think having tiny teeth is funny, too. Oh. So that's why that was dim. The stream's chat was super dim, but it was because I forgot to get rid of the share link thing in the main section of the screen. What a fool. And this is this is where the art comes in. This is gonna be in a minute, but it's them talking at the railing here. Taylor is self-conscious instantly about how long it takes her to respond to what he said, and she hopes that being out of breath explains away the moments where she was stun-locked by being attracted to him. She feels unfashionable, as I had already said, I guess. When offered donuts or croissants, Taylor takes a sugar donut and relishes in it because it's actually made fresh and it's really good. She once again is embarrassed as she thinks her clipped sentence sounded like caveman speak. When she sees where the coffee is from, she questions the $15 cup price, and Brian reminds her that they can afford it. Taylor's brain sort of connects the dots that they have crime money, so $15 coffee isn't actually that big of a deal for them. She's not going to spend her lunchbox money. She just hides it and tries not to think about it. The money still weighs on her a lot, though, on her conscience, etc., since it was not only gotten under false pretenses, but it was also gotten, through crime from the Undersiders, and she's still on that. She's got that whole, I can't even break the law a little. That would be bad, except when I'm undercover, then it's fine. Very confusing, compartmentalized thinking that she can pull off. The hero complex, but also, beyond the hero complex, Vic, it's all that, the mix where she's like, it's fine if I do all these other crimes. And then, she's not going to tell the Undersiders that she's not spending the money because that would tip them off that there was something up with her as a villain. That, maybe they'd know she's undercover, especially Tattletale. So it's kind of a weird point of conversation that she has to avoid with all of them, but as Taylor stares out at the windsurfers on the ocean, Brian asks her how her arm is. She bluffs that it only hurts when she flexes it despite losing sleep because of the pain last night. She really like I think her being like, it's fine, it's all good. I don't think Brian sees through that. Because I mean, she's very like stoic, I think. She gets flustered and embarrassed easily, but she can really fake not feeling pain. Um Greg says, Brian's hot enough, yes. I also appreciate the crab rave. Yeah, yeah, definitely. Um and then let's see here. She's already doing that thing where she hides injuries and weaknesses from everyone because she's learned to do that all the time in her civilian life. So it's not really a learned behavior from being a cape like it is for a lot of other capes who sort of hide their wounds during battle to not give away injuries or weakness. And then Brian goes on to say that they need to keep her stitches in for a week, then remove them. And he says, like, you can go to your doctor, but I don't get the impression that Taylor, like, has a regular doctor. And so when he says he can take care of it for her, it's like, that is what'll happen. The wind blows her hood down here, and I think it's like a metaphor for the hood of compartmentalization, was keeping her from thinking about the bad parts of the Undersiders and the reminders about both the criminal origins of the money and that she's not going to spend and the question of the injury are like cold seaweed air pushing her hood aside, and she's able to quickly regain her composure in this metaphor and puts her hood back on in a direct sense. Brian apologizes for Rachel attacking her. Taylor says it's okay, then says, I think, well, I guess I expected to have people attack me from the moment I put on a costume, so I shouldn't be surprised, right? It caught me a little off guard that it came from someone supposedly on my team, but I'm dealing. Brian says that Rachel is complaining less and seems more okay with Taylor on the team. He doesn't think she'll attack again. I always thought this was I'm not sure. I guess they all take it at face value that Rachel's not going to attack again, and I agree with them, but I have heard a lot of people say that, like, that doesn't seem like a safe assumption. But I'm not sure. I don't know. I don't have much more to say about that. I was kind of reaching at straws. Brian goes on to talk about Rachel's backstory. He awkwardly says how she was too old and unattractive to be a candidate for adoption. Savage, even if true. He says he feels bad saying it. He says Rachel is a special case, but parahumans come from people who have experienced trauma that shapes the way they think from then on. So a lot of them are going to have some pretty bad childhoods, etc. Brian mentions that she was in foster care for a decade, getting bounced between different places. He thinks she was probably messed up before she got her powers, and because she accidentally destroyed her former foster home with her power, the first time she used it, she was pushed further and further into being antisocial by everything in her environment. Most of the crimes in her first few years were crimes of desperation, and I think maybe if they had like negotiated better and like paid her off with food and stuff, they wouldn't have had to like fight her forever and spent like tons and tons of resources and had all this property damage across like a whole state. It just seems like they maybe could have handled the situation in a way that neutralized Rachel, like, at not that much expense by just like giving her what she wanted, which is food and shelter. um but we kind of have a punitive system. Greg says different places have different and better or worse leadership calling the shots. Boston did relatively well handling Damsel, for example. Yeah, and that's what I mean, is that like Boston was able to like try and deal with damsel of distress and like kind of keep her under control. Um, she was yeah, she was from a smaller city that where she was the only villain, but yeah, before she was in Boston. But they were like a sub branch of Armstrong's PRT, so it's kind of the same thing because their leadership is still the same person. Um, and yeah, whoever was in charge of the PRT in the areas where Rachel was decided to attack and not try to placate her. So, maybe we could have gotten better results. Uh, just had a better plan. Taylor says she read Rachel's wiki page, and Brian says that she gets the gist of it then. Uh, Vic had said here on the comments, I'm thinking Lisa might have been the one to edit Rachel's wiki page knowing that Taylor would have looked at it. No one died here. He wants Taylor to try to put up with Rachel to see they have a pretty good team going. And he smiles at her when she agrees to give it a shot, and she immediately becomes embarrassed. To distract from this by Taylor distracts herself from this by controlling a nearby crab, as you can see in the image, and makes it scuttle around to where she points. This is the first time that we see Taylor actively use her power to distract herself. Her power doesn't require anything from her body to work, but sometimes she'll still do stuff to show off while she's fighting, etc. Like right now, pointing to where the crab's gonna go. And most of it is for like showmanship or to make it seem like she has to move around and stuff, and then like for a bluff, like you sort of set someone up for the idea that you like have the bugs move in a certain way every time or whatever, or that there are cues that you give. Taylor's just a master of mental like mind games to trick her opponents and stuff. She's great. Um, Brian notices the crab down on the beach and leans in to ask about her controlling crabs. She feels a thrill sharing secrets and huddling up close to whisper with Brian. Taylor isn't sure where all the what all the parameters are, but she mentions being able to control worms. Worm? Is that why they call it worm? Her thought is the brains have to be simple enough. And I think we see her control Krill at one point, and yeah, I think that there's probably a reasonable range, but why is it called an exoskeleton? An exoskeleton, Vic, is because the chitinous shell that the bugs have is their skeleton, and it's the outside of their body too, whereas we have a skeleton inside our body. I wish the crabs came into play more. I agree. I wish the crabs came into play more, and I'm not certain if we ever see her control a crab again, unfortunately. Which is weird, because there are moments when it feels like she could. I think they probably just don't mention it. Do you think there are any other small brain things she can control? Hard to say. The problem is the size limit. I think she'd have a lot of options if there wasn't a lower limit on the size, because it can't be like ultra low. Um, Vic says, I don't know, hummingbirds, and then Greg says certain politicians probably. I think it's I don't think we ever see her control a bird or a mammal, or a reptile. I think we see her do crustaceans, because krill are crustaceans, right? I don't know. Maybe they're not, but they're pretty simple. They're cephalopods, maybe. Little tiny guys. Maybe she could control barnacles. uh, An army of lizards. That's what Vic wants. Um, let's see here. We're here. Brian says that he has to bring the coffee to the others and offers for Taylor to come with him. She has to go to school. Brian sort of forgets about stuff like that because he does online school. It says here, Alec dropped out, never went. Rachel never went. And Lisa used her power to sit a GED without needing to know stuff. And then Vic mentions here, I think rightly, super weird how they separate Lisa from her power so much at the beginning. I don't think they've been able to come to terms with how much their power is just them. And I agree. Taylor gets caught up thinking about how Brian has an apartment. She thinks about him in relation to him being just another teenager with parents and school work to focus on. He kept changing. Oh, yeah, this is the quote. He kept changing my frame of reference for trying to figure him out. And yeah, she just keeps seeing him on different levels because she met him in these weird circumstances, you know, of being a superpowered criminal, etc. 2 plus 4 times 5 is back. I think Taylor is limited to certain categories of invertebrates, but she can't control skin mites, possibly because they're too small. Vic says, I also totally think that Lisa could have gotten a GED without her powers. Yeah, the GED, I don't know how it is everywhere, but like here, it's super, super easy. I got a GED, and I think I could have realistically sat the test 12 or 13 and still passed it. Just because I did pretty well in school, I didn't have like the required classes though. So, you know, I say I did pretty well. My grades were very poor. I was good at learning the information. Let's see here. Brian gives her a key to the loft. It weaves in a mention of Taylor's guilt over the lunchbox money. Great extra beats, just continually weaving back in all the things that have happened. He tells her that it's her place too now, so even if there's no one there, she can go there and stay, etc. There's a pretty good quote here about how, like, you can go in, track in mud, yell at other people for tracking in mud. Let's see here. She's meeting Brian daily to keep her up to speed with the team. This is the most preferable pick for her since she gets along with him best, has a crush on him, and is wary of Lisa's power, outing that she's still there under false pretenses. And then here's another quote. That wasn't to say I didn't like Lisa. Just being around her made me feel like I had the sword of Damocles hanging over my head. And then here we've got the Sword of Damocles typically refers to a looming threat or impending danger. However, Sword of Damocles as a reference to the actual Roman myth kind of fits Taylor's situation. In the fable, a king was trying to humble, like a tyrannical king was trying to humble one of his subjects and basically had his servants treat Damocles like he was a king, but he had him sit in this specific spot with a sword hung above his head by a single horsehair. The ever-present dread that the sword would fall to cut off Damocles' head was enough that he regretfully gave up all the benefits of being king. For Taylor, the sword is being found out as a traitor, and the luxuries of being king are having friends and being able to break out of her doom spiral at school. Although she would say that she's there for, the Undersider's boss information or whatever, like that's the thing, but whatever. What I'm saying is that if Taylor were Damocles, she'd just sit on the chair and the king, she'd like be the king with the sword waiting above her. Thinking she might chicken out, Taylor says something to commit herself more to going to the hideout again today. Classic Taylor double down. Let's see here. Vic says, Taylor's so silly, he just wants to hang out with her. Hardly even talked about the team in a current events way. Gossiping doesn't count. Yeah, I agree. I mean, like, they do need a system like this to keep her up to date generally, but most days it's not going to be like that. Because there's, a lot of if events continued how they had for the Undersiders the last year, where they did like one job a month. Um, but obviously things will speed up because story. Taylor goes home and thinks about how she had another night in a row of bad sleep. She's been trying not to think about Emma. I had to spend an hour or two tossing and turning in bed, the event replaying over in my head while the throbbing of my wrist jarred me awake every time I started to drift off. Beyond that, I had been pretty successful in avoiding thinking about it. So she's like had this physical reminder that kept her like awake and stuff, and then she like dwelt on Emma then. But other than that, like she's really successful at compartmentalizing. And even though, even though it's only been a day, she's already able to make this whole other like thing for herself with the Undersiders, and she's getting so obviously pulled in that direction because it is able to block out all the negative aspects of her life and like the things with Emma. It's only when she's in like pain that she feels that return to the dread of Emma in the future. Sorry, I'm going off script when I just like think of stuff. Going back to the school, she can't avoid facing it or thinking about it. She thinks about all the class she's missed and all the negative aspects of school. Sparky gets a tiny mention here. He lives again. In, Taylor thinking about him as being sort of lowly in comparison to her. She says that she gets stuck with the likes of Greg and Sparky. Taylor thinks about having to sit through a Gladly class after he abandoned her to the bullies in the hallway yesterday. She thinks about breaking the day into small portions, giving herself a treat for each section she gets through. Either she gets a snack or watches one of her TV shows as a way to get herself through the day. She thinks about how this was needed in the early days. The wounds of Emma's betrayal were still fresh. Taylor goes through her plan for the day. She thinks about the different rewards and treats she can look forward to, and then kind of thinks how she can just use the idea of hanging out with the Undersiders as her reward. Which obviously tells you, like, if she's that invested that it's like, oh, this is my treat, is hanging out with these guys. It's like obvious that she needs their friendship, etc., etc. She does some mental gymnastics about why it's okay to enjoy spending time with them, even if they're villains, and she plans to betray them. It even gets to the point of her asking herself in the audience, right? Vic says, treat. And then, what would be the treat you do to get through a day of bullying? When I was a teenager, had I been bullied, I would have probably promised myself video games. Let's see here. Vic promises themselves. I would write mean fanfic about my enemies, I think. That's a good treat. I agree. That is a good treat. Taylor even comes up with a plan to spend lunch, which is her least favorite portion of the day, because that's when the bullies most often harassed her, trying to get an extension on her art midterm. Then while she's waiting to get into the computer class for her first period, she sees Sophia, and even just having to walk past her is the straw that breaks the camel's back, really. Sophia makes a cry face, then slides some insults about Taylor to her lackeys. Knowing that it'll make going back to class the next day even harder, Taylor bounces right out of there. Even with the anxiety of missing so much class, she still feels relieved as she leaves the school. I don't know if anybody has any final thoughts on the chapter, but I think it's a pretty good one. I mean, Not like a lot happens, but the start of every arc is a little slow. And it gets into it. Let's see here. Taylor's pleased with how close the bus drops her off to where the loft is hidden in the docks. Thinking about how she's going to be here a lot. There's a nice bit of texture with Taylor seeing the beach and the ocean before moving on through the crowd at the boardwalk. They kind of talk about how like scenic the place is. Um, it's cold enough that no one can actually swim though, so they're all just sort of hanging out, like looking at the ocean. Um, Vic says the fact that she can actually find it after being there once. Yeah, I mean she's pretty good at like stuff like that, navigating. Like she thinks to herself how like she would lose her way, but she really doesn't. I'll switch to the 3.2 art as it happens. It's pretty soon here. Good call though, Greg. Asking about it. Um, let's see here. Whoop, up, up, Oh yeah, so she's no tourist, and she picks members of the crowd out as ABB, despite not being in gang colors. She can spot a white supremacist by his tattoos, and she sees a boardwalk enforcer. We're reminded that beyond the official cops and heroes, there are also unofficial law enforcement to hurt people who hurt business for the high-end shops on the boardwalk. And they're pretty ruthless, too. We'll learn about it more later. Taylor heads down an alley to the docks and makes her way through the streets of abandoned buildings. She's glad for the graffiti because she hasn't learned the area yet, and the buildings all look pretty similar. When she gets to the loft, Brian opens the door, and Lisa told him that Taylor had arrived, and he asks about her going to school. We get a beat about her being wary about Lisa's power. Then she tells him that she changed her mind, and they go upstairs. Boop. And that's where the art is when they go upstairs. Um, Brian and Alec are wearing workout clothes and sparring, and Lisa's on the phone on the far side of the loft. Rachel's in her room with her dogs. So Alec calls Taylor a dork, and she tells him off for this. Doesn't want to let him like form it into a pattern. Also has like more confidence as a villain, just generally. Um, um, Vic doesn't like the 3.2 art, I guess. Says that it's lacking this week and says sorry, but I don't know. I think it's fine. I like how Alec looks. I didn't expect to see Tattletale in it, so it's at least interesting. I really do like it though. Um, I don't know what to tell you. It's hard to analyze your own like stuff all the time, I guess. Um, let's see here. She's talking secrets in the corner, says Vic. Yeah. Um, let's see here. Taylor watches them for a while with interest, realizing that it's more Brian trying to teach Alec basics than actual sparring. We'll soon learn that Taylor's hobby is cape fights and training for cape fights, so she's pretty into this. Um, we get a reminder of how Brian is actually like huge. He's a foot taller than Taylor and Alec, which makes him something like 6'8" or around there. I'm not sure if I know like anyone this tall. I'm not sure if I've ever met anyone 6'8". I've met people who are like 6'3" or 4, but even that seems like very tall compared to me, a relatively Taylor-sized individual. Um, uh, but and then Vic says, "Wildbow again, making everyone about 4 inches too tall." And yeah, I mean, maybe so. These are kind of like there. He is massive. These characters are simultaneously supposed to be realistic, and I think that they're supposed to be very like larger than life and extreme in the way that they are. Like uh, they're still just these magnified characters. Like, because it's a story, a lot of stuff's kind of turned up to 11. But yes, Vic is right. He's massive. Because of his tallness stat, he can easily step in and out of punching range, on top of having longer arms than Alec. Alec has sort of noodle teen boy bod, and Brian works out, so, Taylor doesn't outright think that Brian is super hot, but everything she does think, it kind of gives the game away. Brian goes super easy on Alec, but still dodges his punches. Alec telegraphs his attacks whenever he's going for it. There are tons of actual pointers on doing well in a scuffle throughout this chapter. I think this section has a good back and forth dialogue between the three of them. Alec gives up once he sort of starts realizing that he's doing badly, even though Brian was going easy on him. Brian says he needs to learn to fight, then Alec justifies that he has a taser. I think Brian's right, but Alec is, irresponsible and lazy. Vic does point out that says, I don't think Alec's lack of fighting skills ever bites him in the ass, though. I think that is correct. I don't think there's ever a moment in the book where he really, has a problem because of his lack of hand-to-hand combat, but it still seems very irresponsible, given their line of work. Vic says, I need to find out how tall Wildbow is. Couldn't find online. Yeah, I mean, I think that would be interesting. Nah, Alec does nothing wrong, says Vic. Brian is disappointed, but then is happy again when Taylor shows genuine interest in learning to fight. Mind giving me some a few quick and dirty pointers? Taylor does not think of how she phrases stuff a lot of the time. Brian goes through a bunch of stuff with Taylor. I'm glad this is here because we get to see that she doesn't start out as some super combat genius, but she'll always incorporate everything she learns throughout the book, and she'll just keep adding it because while she doesn't start with all the knowledge, she is still a super powered fighting machine. He shows her how to make a fist and gives her some tips on that, how to step into jabs and how to guard with her other arm while she's punching. He starts to incorporate hitting her back kind of early on. This gives the pressure of actually fighting someone, but Taylor starts to feel sympathy for Alec after she takes a couple jabs. Brian's holding back, but still hitting hard enough to hurt. 2 + 4 × 5 says, when your power is to force someone to make a mistake, I guess you don't have to be good at hand-to-hand combat. Yeah, that's true. I think he could beat a lot of people, and I kind of think it's kind of odd that they don't power spar, because the two of them could fight reasonably well without hurting each other too badly between just Gru and Alec. And I think it'd be interesting. Probably help them more than just a fist fight, but sympathy for Alec. Yes, Vic. Let's see here. They change topics quickly if Brian doesn't think that they're making progress on something, and he shows her how to balance better. They talk about the ball of the foot, and Alex says they're lame. I actually think that this is funny and good info for readers, because I've heard a lot of other podcasts where at least one of the people doesn't know what the ball of the foot is and thinks the exact same thing as Taylor. So, yeah, it was just funny. And Vic says, I thought that scene was funny. Yeah, I agree. I think that this chapter is pretty funny and has good dialogue. Because Taylor is being wrong. Doesn't happen too often. Yeah, no, it's true. She's usually trying to be very sure to be right about everything, so. Let's see here. Taylor confirms some common wisdom she's heard about punching through things instead of just trying to hit. She asks Brian what to do defensively. He says to stay aggressive and unpredictable. Vic says, better way of saying meaner and creative. um, I'm not sure how much Taylor would take. I'm not sure that Brian knew how much that Taylor would take that advice to heart, to stay aggressive and unpredictable. It is maybe her strongest aspect as a cape. Taylor asks if he's formally trained in fighting, and Brian talks about having grown up working out with his dad in a boxing gym. He also talks about a few martial arts that he's learned the basics of, but he thinks it's better to know a bit and move on because there will always be like better martial artists, better fighters, even if you train all the time. So he thinks it's better to diversify your skill set and be a little good at a lot of things on top of having a power, which I mostly agree with. Like, specializing is good depending, but for someone like him who's just going to be mixing it up with all types of different people, like, is really smart how he does it. So, um, Brian shows Taylor some key areas of attack, and she appreciates his bluntness about their size and strength differences because she wants practical knowledge for moving forward in like actual real world fights. She's a little disquieted about that Brian knows so much about wrecking people's bodies, but puts those thoughts aside. Don't worry about that. She changes the subject on purpose to distract herself and talks about getting a weapon like a knife or a baton. She's like, oh no, it worries me that he's breaking people's bodies. Get me a knife. um, Brian mentions that they can get high quality gear from their boss if they know that what they want. Then he mentions Lisa's on the phone with the boss. Um, Taylor doesn't think that she can eavesdrop, but but she asks Brian and Alec about their boss. At first, she thinks that she's pushed things too hard when they sort of look at each other suspiciously, but then they tell her that they have an anonymous sponsor and say that they knew she'd want to know about who the boss was. Because they would. And then moments later, Lisa comes to the front of the loft from the back and tells them they have a job from the boss. They're going to rob a bank. They're going to meet Australian citizen Rob Banks. And then, any final thoughts on the chapter? I thought this was a really, really good chapter. It's still pretty short, like less words than the previous chapter and so forth, but they pack a lot in. And I mean, whoa, like Vic says, rob a bank? Can you believe this? It's crazy. It's crazy stuff. As far as themes, I think compartmentalization is top dog here. She is like thinking about her own compartmentalization throughout 3.1 and 3.2. She does all sorts of mental gymnastics around Emma and Brian and Lisa. Oh, it's pretty great. Taylor is a great character. Other themes. Bullying. Obviously, the bullying is so strong that it so deeply affects the way Taylor thinks that she thinks of this like treats and rewards system and like breaking the day down into these little portions. Some would say little compartments of time. And it's really just like entirely shapes the way that she thinks when she's in that environment where she expects to be bullied. And her mindset, I think, is like noticeably different when she's at like the loft than when she's at school. I think it's pretty well done. Vic says audience participation. Oh, I see. Yes. For when we get there. Glossary. I don't think we have anything for the glossary because I talked about the Sword of Damocles while we went past it. Characters. I want to talk about Brian. So Brian, um, we sort of get a lot about him in terms of he's a pretty dynamic person. He knows how to act in different situations. He knows how to present himself. He is practical and cautious. Um, hmm. He's very warm toward Taylor and sees her as like a natural ally on a team like this. Um, they have a lot of the same opinions on stuff and are on like a similar level of seriousness. Um, hmm. Brian. Great character. Loves donuts and coffee, clearly. Um, then we'll have Alec. Alec is, Vic's favorite, so we can't say anything too awful ever, unless we say it with a nice wink. Greg says, or even just independent study. Oh yeah, that's to Vic's audience participation. Oops. But yeah, Alec is he gets a lot of time to shine here. He often intentionally puts himself in the background, so he'll like not have too many lines, but he jumps in with the jokes when he can, and he always likes to mess with people and make fun of them. It's his fave. Um, Something to mention about Brian is his chameleonness that throws off Taylor. Yeah, changes his appearance to fit in any setting. Yeah, he can. He has like three different outfits in two chapters or three chapters, um, because it's like from the stuff in arc 2 to 3.1 to 3.2, and he's always fitting in well with where he is. He sort of uh has a natural like ease and grace about the way he moves around the world, I would say, compared to I don't know, the other undersiders. um but yeah, Alec, what to say about Alec? He's and I know that Vic is gonna roll her eyes right out of her head. He's a smart Alec. Um and he's very okay with the setting, the situation they have with their boss, whereas like Brian isn't. Brian wants to know more details and stuff. Alec just says it's weird, but that there's no downsides. Like he clearly doesn't care to think it through. On top of hasn't, um, or maybe he has and he just put it aside. But I really think that he just has never bothered to think it through. Um, And then Lisa, very brief appearance here, but we get to see Taylor's thoughts about Lisa throughout. I think she really wants to be friends with Lisa, and Lisa is uh, the kind of friendship she needs in terms of support. But she feels this distance between her because of her secret of being a air quotes hero. Um, and being undercover and everything. Um, but yeah, moving on to the powers, knowledge, and world building, we learn a little bit more about Taylor being able to control things other than just bugs. But I think this is the only use or mention of powers in the chapters is messing with that crab. They really focus on the characters and just the mundane setting in these two chapters, and then it kind of well, I actually no, I say that it mentions Lisa's power a lot. Not come to think of it, so she's constantly thinking of Lisa's power, but Lisa's power could be a regular person who has like really good instincts for like sussing out information. Um, so it just feels like much more mundane than when they're running around avoiding laser beams, etc. Um, let's see here. Yeah, for world building, I think the setting of the city is really well portrayed at the start of 3.2. Um, the way she describes the beach, and in 3.1, the dock itself, like before people arrive, when the buildings are still closed. I think these two chapters do really great world building for the Brockton Bay setting. Um, you really just see the same area like two distinct times, and it feels like really different. But Taylor is really knowledgeable about the place she's from, you know. And I think that's good. It makes sense. It's good storytelling. So, for the audience participation, we'll go through. It was the do you think Taylor should try to go back to school and finish out the year with how much she's struggling and the amount of school she starts skipping. And Vic's answer was Taylor should do online classes. What the fuck? Easy to convince her dad that she met the others at a library and they are an online school study group since it's true for Brian. And then Greg said, even just independent study. She's a pretty motivated kid. Yeah, I agree. I think that she could just she could work out something with the schools. Taylor should take a gap year. I think that would be fine too. I think that's a good answer. 2 + 4 × 5. Because I had in my answer here that I had written down, Taylor and Danny should look into alternative school options, online or deferring classes until summer, which would be kind of like the rest of this year off. Because she did pass the first semester, so she could take just the second semester in the summer, and then really anything other than the current situation. But that would require Taylor to communicate with Danny, which isn't really happening right now. So my answer was that the things you guys said, but because of their poor communication skills, it's not happening. And I mean, Vic, you're right. It would be like really easy to convince for online classes, I think. You even have the excuse, like you mentioned, of the Undersiders with Brian actually taking online classes and stuff. Um, yeah, I mean, basically, if they just face the problem in a more head-on way, I think that they could get out of this terrible school problem she has in a mundane way. But they don't really approach it that way. This week's question is going to be: do you think the plan they cooked up in 3.3 is a good one? And just sort of discuss. Do you think it's if it's a good plan? Are there flaws in it? If it's a bad plan, what would you do? What would you do better? Just sort of tell me what you think of their little scheme. And then Vic says never any flaws. So our gang is perfect. The Discord server link is in the channel and stream descriptions. The author of the original work being read can be supported on Patreon at patreon.com/wildbow. The full text of the work is available for free online at parahumans.wordpress.com. And there's also a full fan-made audiobook of the entire work at audioworm.rain-online.org. And thanks for tuning into the stream this week. See you guys next week, and it'll be at the same time, 1 o'clock Mountain, noon Pacific. We'll be reading chapters 3.3 and 3.4, which I will also put in the Discord. Anyway, thank you. Bye.